He was the maintenance guy, not the head of facilities, not the building manager, just the man who showed up before everyone else arrived and left after the last light was switched off. The one who fixed the broken hinge on the third-floor bathroom door without being asked, who replaced the fluorescent tube in the copy room and left no note, no invoice slip, nothing to indicate that the darkness anyone had been squinting through for 2 weeks had simply been handled. His name was Edmund Parrish. He had worked at the Hargrove Centre for the Arts in Ottawa for 11 years, which was longer than most of the staff on the administrative side, longer than 2 of the program directors, and longer by a full decade than the communications coordinator, who had recently begun referring to the building as the Hub. Nobody called Edmund anything except Ed, and most of the time, they didn't call him anything at all. He drove a 2009 Dodge pickup that had rust along the wheel wells and a crack running diagonally across the lower right corner of the windshield. He ate lunch in the utility room on the basement level, usually something from a container his sister had packed the night before, sitting on a folding chair near the mop sink with a paperback novel open across his knee. He wore the same kind of work shirt every day, gray, long-sleeved, no logo, and kept his tools in a belt he'd owned since his late 20s. He was 53 years old, and looked to the people who noticed him at all like a man who had never wanted anything more than he already had. That was not entirely wrong, but it was not entirely right either. The Hargrove Centre's annual gala was held every November in the main atrium. It was a fundraising event, technically, though the actual fundraising happened mostly through a silent auction and a brief pitch from the executive director before dessert. The rest of the evening was cocktails and conversation, and a string quartet from the local conservatory playing near the east windows. The board members came. The major donors came. The city councilor, whose ward included the building, came. Various artists who had shown work in the galleries upstairs came, mostly in the hope of being seen. The maintenance staff did not come, not as guests. Edmund came because a section of temporary flooring had been laid over a stretch of the atrium where a pipe repair had left the concrete uneven, and the flooring company had done a mediocre job securing the edges. He'd noticed it 3 days before the event and flagged it in an email to Donna Keene, the operations manager. Donna had thanked him and said she'd handle it. The flooring company had sent someone, that someone had done an even more mediocre job. So Edmund had come in at 6 in the evening, 2 hours before guests were due to arrive, with adhesive tape and a utility knife and 40 minutes to spare, and had made the floor safe the way he always made things safe, quietly, without drawing attention, with no particular expectation of acknowledgement. He'd been planning to leave before the event started. He'd put on clean work clothes that morning, specifically because he'd known he might be visible in the building. Not dressed up, just clean. That was the extent of his preparation for the evening. But Donna caught him in the corridor near the service entrance at 7:10 and asked if he could stay a little longer, just until the caterers finished bringing in the last of the equipment, in case any of the heating units in the East Wing decided to act up the way they had in October. She said it in the way she always said things, warmly but with the assumption that he would say yes because he always said yes. Sure, Edmund said. He stood near the side corridor for the next hour, mostly invisible, watching the atrium fill. He knew a few faces. He recognized Clifford Oates from the city council, who had been photographed for the center's annual report last year, and whose expression in person was considerably less engaged than it had been in the photograph. He recognized Sylvie Renaud from the gallery board, who had once stopped him in the hallway to say the thermostat in the boardroom wasn't working, and then walked away before he could ask her which boardroom. He recognized the string quartet because he'd let them in through the service entrance every Thursday for 8 months, while their usual entrance was under renovation. He did not know the group of people gathered near the bar on the south end of the atrium, but he noticed them the way he tended to notice things, with the detached attention of someone who was not part of what he was watching. There were 6 of them, late 30s, early 40s, 2 women and 4 men, dressed in the particular way that indicated they had money, but preferred you to believe it was incidental. They had the ease of people, for whom rooms like this were a regular occurrence, not an occasion. They'd been drinking since before Edmund arrived, and their voices had that edge of looseness that alcohol gives to people who are already confident. One of them, a man with a fleece vest over a dress shirt, the kind of vest that costs $300 and is designed to look like it costs $30, glanced over at Edmund and said something Edmund couldn't hear. Two of the others laughed. Edmund didn't react. He'd learned a long time ago that not reacting was the most efficient use of energy in situations like that. What happened next was not planned, or rather, it was planned by the man in the fleece vest, which is a different thing. He walked over. His name, Edmund would later learn, was Gareth Sloane. He was on the center's Young Patrons Committee, which meant he'd donated a modest amount of money 2 years running, and was therefore treated as a stakeholder in rooms where decisions were made. "Hey," Gareth said. He had the cheerful aggression of someone who thinks he's being friendly. "You work here?" "Yes," Edmund said. "Like maintenance?" "Yes." Gareth looked back at his group with a grin that Edmund recognized, the grin of a person performing for an audience. "We were just talking," Gareth said, turning back, "about the entertainment situation. The quartet finished up early. There's kind of a dead zone right now before the remarks." He glanced around, expansive. "You know anything about music? You play anything?" There was a piano against the north wall. It had been there for 12 years. Edmund had tuned the casters on its wheels twice. He had moved it 8 or 9 times for various events and moved it back again. He had once stayed behind after everyone left and played it for 22 minutes in the empty atrium while the cleaning staff worked around him. Nobody had been there to see that. "A little," Edmund said. Gareth's grin widened. He looked over his shoulder. "He says he plays a little." More laughter. Then back to Edmund, with a gesture toward the piano that managed to be both grand and dismissive. "Well, go ahead. Give us a little something. We could use the entertainment." The way he said entertainment landed in a particular way. Not cruel, exactly, just thoughtless in the way that people are when they've never had to consider how their words sound to the person receiving them. Edmund looked at the piano. He thought about saying no. It would have been reasonable. It would have been the thing that kept the evening smooth and uncomplicated. He could have smiled and said he was just there to check on the heating and gone back to standing near the service corridor. He thought about the pipe repair under the temporary flooring, the fluorescent tube in the copy room, the 11 years of things quietly handled and never remarked upon. Then he walked to the piano. He pulled the bench out the way he always did, slightly farther from the keys than most players prefer, because of his height, and sat down. He didn't look at Gareth's group. He didn't look at anyone. He set his hands in his lap for a moment and was still. In the atrium, the conversations continued. Someone near the bar laughed loudly at something. A caterer moved through the space with a tray of glasses. Clifford Oates said something to Sylvie Renault with the practiced sincerity of a man who has said the same thing to dozens of people at dozens of similar events. Edmund placed his hands on the keys. What came out of the piano in the next 4 seconds was enough to stop 3 conversations cold, not because it was loud, because it was exactly right, in the way that things are exactly right when someone has spent 30 years learning how to make something sound inevitable. The opening phrase of the Goldberg Variations, Bach, the aria, fell into the air of the atrium with the unhurried certainty of a person who is not trying to impress anyone, which is the only way to impress everyone. By the time he reached the end of the first line, the string quartet had stopped packing up their instruments. By the end of the first full variation, the bar had gone quiet. Gareth Sloane was still standing where he'd been standing when he'd made his gesture toward the piano. His glass was in his hand, and he had forgotten about it. Edmund did not rush. He did not perform. He played the way he did everything, with the steady, unpretentious competence of someone who has never needed to announce himself, because the work has always spoken clearly enough on its own. His back was straight. His face was neutral. His hands moved the way hands move when they know the music so completely that playing it is less like remembering and more like breathing. He played for 18 minutes. At some point, Edmund wasn't sure exactly when, the executive director, Margot Thériault, had moved to a position near the east windows where she had a clear sight line to the piano. She stood very still. She was holding a glass of sparkling water and she was not drinking it. When the final phrase resolved, the aria returning at the end the way Bach intended, closing the circle it had opened, Edmund lifted his hands from the keys and rested them in his lap. The silence lasted a moment longer than silences usually last in rooms full of people. Then Clifford Oates started clapping, which was unexpected because Clifford Oates did not seem like a man who was easily moved. A few others joined him, then more. By the end, it was the whole room, and in the particular acoustics of the Hargrove atrium, it was loud enough to be startling. Edmund stood up, pushed the bench back in, and walked back toward the service corridor. He didn't bow. He didn't look at Gareth Sloane. He didn't wait to see who was watching. Margot found him 20 minutes later in the utility room downstairs, eating the last of his dinner from his container. She was in her gala dress and heels, which looked slightly out of place in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and fresh-cut drywall, and she had the expression of someone who has just realized they've been working alongside something for a long time without seeing it clearly. "Edmund," she said. "The heating's fine, by the way," he said. "East wing's been stable all evening." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you played." "You didn't ask." It came out without any particular edge. It was just true, and he said it the way he said true things, plainly, without dressing it up. Margot was quiet again. Then she said, "Where did you learn?" Edmund set down his container. "My mother taught me," he said. "She was a music teacher in Sudbury. I started when I was 6. Studied at the Conservatory of Music for 4 years after high school. Classical piano composition minor." He paused. "Then my father got sick, and I came back home. And then other things happened, the way other things do. And you ended up here." "I ended up here." He said it without any particular weight. It wasn't resignation, it wasn't bitterness. It was just the shape his life had taken, and he had made his peace with shapes. Margot looked at him for a moment. "The Goldberg Variations," she said. "The full thing. From memory, yes." She pressed her lips together briefly, the way people do when they're recalibrating. "Edmund, we have a winter concert series that begins in January. It's been running for 6 years. We've never had a solo piano evening because we've never found the right person." Edmund picked up his container again. "I'm the maintenance guy, Margot. You can be both." He looked at her. She was not smiling in a persuasive way. She was just stating what seemed obvious to her. And maybe Edmund thought it was obvious. He had just made it complicated by keeping the two things in separate rooms for so long. "I'll think about it," he said. She nodded. "The gala upstairs is asking about you, by the way. A few people want to know who you are." "They know who I am," Edmund said. "I fixed the third-floor bathroom door in September." Margot laughed. A genuine one, short and surprised. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Gareth Sloane asked me to pass along that he's sorry if his comment earlier came across as rude." "It did come across as rude," Edmund said. "But I'm not concerned about it." She nodded once and left him to his dinner. The walk to his truck that night was the same walk it always was, through the service corridor past the recycling bins, across the lower parking lot to the far corner where he always parked, because the spot near the entrance was reserved for visitors, and he'd never seen the point of parking in it, even on mornings when it was empty. His boots made the same sound on the pavement they always made. The Ottawa air in November had that particular quality it gets in the third week of the month, cold in a way that means it is not going anywhere, that this is the temperature now, and the only question is how much more of it is coming. He sat in the truck for a moment before starting it, not thinking about the evening particularly, or not thinking about it in a way that felt urgent. He turned it over quietly, the way you turn over things that are complete and don't require resolution. He had played the Goldberg Variations in the main atrium of the Hargrove Centre for the Arts, in front of 140 people, or however many had been there, in his work clothes, without preparing, without being asked in the way you actually ask someone, without anyone knowing until 22 seconds in that they were listening to something real. That part of it was fine. He had always known what he had. He'd never needed anyone else to confirm it. What stayed with him driving back through the glebe toward his house on Flora Street was the silence after the last note. Not the applause, the silence. That moment before the first pair of hands started moving, when the room had not yet decided what to do with itself, when the music had not fully left the air, and the people were still caught in it. That was the part he had played for, if he was honest. Not for Gareth Sloane, not for Margot, not for Clifford Oates or the Young Patrons Committee, or anyone who might be reconsidering their assumptions about a man they'd seen carrying equipment through corridors for a decade. For that silence. For the proof that it was still there, inside him, intact and unhurried, and exactly what it had always been. He turned onto Flora Street. The house was dark except for the porch light, which he'd left on a timer. He pulled into the driveway, turned the engine off, and sat for a moment more in the quiet. His father had gotten sick in 1997. He'd come back from the conservatory after his second year, and he had never gone back. That was not the tragedy it might have sounded like from the outside. His father had needed him. His mother had needed him. And the piano had been there throughout. In the living room on Kathleen Street in Sudbury, and later, after his parents were gone, in the corner of his own house, the same upright Heinzmann he'd learned on as a child, refinished twice and tuned twice a year by a man named Clive, who drove down from Carlton Place and charged him $80 and always accepted a cup of tea. He had never stopped playing. He had only stopped doing it where anyone could see. Whether that needed to change was a question he would take his time with. He had always taken his time with things. That was not indecision. That was just how he moved through the world. Carefully, thoroughly, without urgency, with the knowledge that most things worth doing were worth doing right, and doing right required not being rushed into them. He got out of the truck, went inside, fed the cat, and put the kettle on. Upstairs, in the room off the landing that served as his study and, when he was in the mood, as a small practice space, the Heinzmann sat in its corner with the fallboard closed. He had not played it tonight when he got home. He thought he might, later. But for now he sat at the kitchen table with his tea and his novel, and let the evening settle around him like something that had happened and was finished and had gone the way it was supposed to go. In the Hargrove atrium, 11 years of someone not being seen had ended in 18 minutes. Edmund Parrish was not sure that changed very much about his life, but he thought perhaps it changed something, small and specific and not easily named, about the way the building would feel when he walked into it on Monday morning. That was enough.